All right, so awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I am very excited to get stuck into some of the questions that I have for our two very talented directors, Azeem and Mos. Firstly, I wanted to say congratulations for making these films generally and for being here to talk to us about them. But also, both are screening this Sunday at London Indian Film Festival, which is very exciting. So big props to you both for that, as well as obviously all of the other festivals you guys are doing, and I will be there to see it. So looking forward. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you guys want to do sort of like a very quick introduction before we get stuck in for our audience, and then I can sort of get to some of the questions. Yeah, maybe Azim, you want to go first?
Sure. About interaction about me or
Yeah, yourself, the film, whatever you feel.
so my name is Azeem Rajulawalla. I'm based in London. I'm born and brought up in the UK with an Indian family, and I kind of started learning about Noirs and fundamentals, the story of fundamental through listening to their music in 2020 during the lockdown. And initially, I wanted to tell a story about the entire scene of the British Asian Underground movement, which they were part of in the 1990s. And I couldn't initially find a clear narrative that kind of told that story. So I parked the idea for a couple of years, and I picked it back up again after going through another phase of listening to fundamentals music and really listening to the lyrics and connecting with what they're saying and feeling the anger um, and understanding the anger that it is in a lot of their music. But then also just inspired by the creativity, sonically, I think they're doing a lot of really interesting stuff.
Mhm.
I started reading about Aki and I learned about the All Is War album, and that was the kind of key information that I needed to kind of develop a narrative. So in 2023, I reached out to Aki and we started talking and he was up for making the film and I kind of pitched the ideas to him. And then sort of in late 2023 is when we shot the film. And for a year and a bit we were in the edit and trying to raise funding simultaneously because it was independently funded. And then sort of mid 2025 we finished the film and then since November 2025 we've been showing the film. So it's been quite a few years of working on it as a passion project.
Sounds like a process. Before I continue, Most, you want to do a little quick intro before I get.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Moss. I'm one of the directors on After Eight, the story of Satpal Ram. I kind of found the story because I'm British Bangladeshi, and most of the Indian restaurants in this country are owned by Bangladeshis. And it's the cuisine sort of considered one of the UK's like national dishes. It's one of our pride and joys. However, those that sort of facilitated that cuisine have a bit of a different story to tell. So my dad owned a restaurant and he was racially attacked in the 80s and hospitalized. And I worked in the restaurants growing up as a little boy. And all the waiters would constantly tell me about the experiences they had, the racial violence they endured. And so fast forward like a decade, I kind of thought, why are these stories not uncovered? Why don't we know about them? Why they're never spoken about? So then I sort of spoke to my family that worked in the industry and my dad. And then I thought I'd do some field research. So I started going up and down the country, speaking to different restaurateurs. And there were many cases like Sat Pal's, but it was through that journey I found the case of Sat Pal Ram. And I thought, this has not been touched on before. This is really quite something. There's just so many layers of injustice he faced at, from the courts to, the initial incident. And I co-directed it with my colleague Usaid Yunus, and he also comes from a restaurant background. He's Pakistani, it's Pakistani Iraqi. So then that was the genesis of the project. Really, we couldn't find Satpal. He just went off the radar, and then I found him through an old campaigner in Canada. She
Oh,
put me in touch with him. It took months and months, and then I finally got his number, gave him a ring, and he sort of disclosed to me he's not very well anymore. He struggles with the trauma, And then he turns out he lives six hours away from me. So I drove up to see him and I was like, really like to make a film about you. And he said, no, I'm not doing it. And then it took 4.5 years to convince him. And during that time, we sort of filmed with everyone else. And then now you get to see it today. And, thank you everyone for coming to see it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, firstly, Musa, it's really powerful to hear, like, also what a personal story this is for you, obviously with your dad and love the people that you know, which I think adds another element. And I guess one of my first questions was going to be is like why Satpal, why Aki for both of you, but you've sort of already answered that, which is really nice. And Mos, you said, I mean, it's what 4.5 years of convincing, and Azim, you said it's been what 3 years from start to finish, uh, maybe even more. I mean, what's kept you going? Like, why continue? And whoever wants to answer this first, please feel free.
I think because I wish I knew about stories like that of Satpal growing up. I didn't, and the campaign behind him, it was just such a militant, forward-thinking and international campaign. And it was what was a British Asian story branched out, and then people, he was on the news in India, he was in Canada, America, this just really large campaign about this one guy that defended himself in a racist attack in Birmingham. It was just really powerful. I was really drawn to it, and I was kind of angry and frustrated that we don't know about these stories, just why didn't I know? I wish I knew, I grew up in a quite a rough area which was very white. So there's a lot of racism. So I think it would have done me a lot of good if I knew about it. So it was kind of out of that frustration, and people like my dad, people like my uncles and that own these restaurants, but their stories were never heard. So in that sense, Satpal kind of represented a lot more than just himself. I felt like he spoke to a lot of people. So for me and Usaid, it was just like we had to tell the story. There was no way we weren't going to do it. It's not easy sticking in there for 4.5 years dealing with someone with complex PTSD trauma. There's a lot of due diligence and an incredible amount of patience that goes into it, but you just felt obliged to do it. And mind you, many people tried to film with Satpal over the years. He never said yes. It was through developing this relationship with him and building that access and trust that he kind of said, okay, fine, you can do it. It wasn't easy, mind you. It was a lot of yes and no's. We'd film and then he'd say no, and then we'd film again, and it was a lot of work, but you just felt like it had to kind of be documented and cemented in history. And the campaigners themselves, they spent 10 years trying to get this man out. Like it's their story just as much as it is Satpal's and the rest of us.
Yeah, amazing. Before I divert, Azim, you want to go?
Yeah, it was. I was fascinated by how Aki's story felt cyclical, and like I said, we shot the film in late 2023, when the world is it very much in flux, and as we were editing the film, there was stuff going on in the Glastonbury stuff with Bob Vylan and like Kneecap kind of throughout that period as well, and it just you got this sense that Aki's story is obviously set in a period of time that has now sort of passed. It's like the post 9/11, post Iraq War stuff that he's responding to. Even though we very much live in a post 9/11 world. Um, but I just had this feeling, this sense that what Aki was talking about had direct resonance with what's going on today. And it took a while to convince people that that was the case, and that's partly why we had to make it independently because we couldn't get money or any sort of funding or support from anyone else. Um, and it was sort of like even like when as we were editing it in 2024, there were like sort of race riots going on in the UK across the UK, and it was bizarre to see that by this point or Keir Starmer, who is for now the Prime Minister of the UK, like he made a speech during the edit while we were editing it, of where he was essentially paraphrasing a very famous Enoch Powell speech, calling us like an island of strangers, and we had already put Enoch Powell into the cut of the film. And it's like this is mad. Like how is this happening? So I think that's kind of the question of like maybe why you wanted to make it now. And I think as I met Aki and I spent a lot of time with Aki and we've kind of become friends, um, I just really connected with his story and I thought that people deserved to hear what he had to say and deserved to hear it from a less filtered, less sort of soundbitey point of view, really provide or reintroduce context to the controversy that surrounds him and his life and his music.
Yeah. Something you said, I mean, really stuck. And as I was watching it, particularly, I remember there's one part of the edit which I also want to ask you about, where there's a sort of like, I think it's a BBC News segment where someone asks Aki, do you, it wasn't, I'm trying to remember what the exact one, oh yeah. Do you think suicide bombing is a bad idea? Yes. Right. And it felt,
I knew you were gonna ask that one because that's the one that always sticks out.
yeah, which is just frankly an insane question. But it made me think of like all of the journalists now asking anyone with a Palestinian voice, like, do you condemn Hamas, right? Like the cyclical nature is so evident in both of your films and what's happening now with the legal system as well, which I think is just crazy. And also, in some ways, very validating in that the importance of making films like these, even if it was from 20 years ago,
Mm.
however much time, it's still so relevant today. I wanted to ask about trust for you both because obviously both Aki and Satpal have been through so much. Satpal in particular, struggling with complex PTSD and a lot of his own issues as a result of his treatment. And Aki's obviously been severely let down by the media and his representation consistently. I mean, how would you go about, well, 4.5 year relationship, for example, and now you said maybe Aki's one of your friends. How do you start building that trust with somebody in a way where you're not just like an observer? It's like portraying them to the world and actually someone they can trust and confide in.
How do you start building that trust, did you say?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, however you want to approach it.
I don't know. I don't actually know. It's funny because like I met Satpal and we spent the whole day together and actually I suppose I do know it's just relationship building, but I think it's so unique to each person, you have a different approach with each person. But with Satpal, I met him. Obviously he said no, and we had a chat, and he was like, "Look, I drove a long way to see him." And at the time, I was like kind of bummed out. I like got in my car, and I was like deflated. And I called up my colleague, and I was like, "Man, like I failed." And like he said no, and he was like, "No, no, no, no. That went really well. Like he likes you. Like that's fine. Like this is you go from here." And Asata Shakur, rest in peace, wrote him a letter when he was in prison from Cuba in solidarity. And I kind of just texted him the next morning saying, I remember you saying that. Can you just tell me a bit more about that? And he calls me and he was like, yeah, this is what happened. Anyway, listen, I'm coming to London. Let's meet up.
Oh,
So he
wow.
just kind of just, he was happy to be my friend. And I was kind of happy because I thought I would have to reach out and go, but no, actually, we just sort of rolled. So there's chemistry there. And it kind of went from there through that process. I was meeting his friends, his family, and they were like, anytime I'd meet them, I'd just be like, listen, I'm trying to make a film about him. Like, you gotta help me. And they would. They'd constantly be nagging at him as well. And it's that scene you see in the kitchen where Tony's shouting at him. There's multiple of those have happened throughout my time with him. Helen was another one. Helen, when we filmed the interview with her, actually, the night before, I went round to just film some bits, and she calls him and she's like, "Why the hell am I doing this if you're not? Like, what was all that? Why did I spend all this time getting you out? Like, what's the point in any of this? Like, get it together and leave something behind because you're not here forever. What was all of that for?" And Tony sort of echoes the same things in that scene, and it was through that that it just happened. She shouted at him on the phone that week. We went to his house and he was like, all right, fine, I'll do it. Don't get me wrong, 3 months later, then he pulled out again. And then he said yes again. And then he never said okay until he saw the cut. And then that was a really emotional day because for them, this has been going on for 40 years. And that was something. And then he was like, you have my full support. But up until then, you're always just, I was just always anxious. You just don't know what's going to happen, you know.
Can imagine. Wow, that's some really powerful stuff. Even now, I'm just like,
Uh, One more thing actually, which was really difficult for us. We worked with a group called Film in Mind. So they have a wing where they sort of specialize in trauma and people working in film or contributors that are vulnerable. So we were able to get Satpal some mental health support, which was the first time he's got, which was really a great achievement for us. Um, and one of the things that in our sessions, trying to also understand how to work with him was this film may never come out because if he's really not okay with it, if it's affecting him too much, then you're gonna have to pull the plug. Which as a filmmaker you never want to hear if you spent nearly 5 years on something and to know that it might not actually come out. It's just part of the game. And I don't know if there's filmmakers in the crowd, but it's one of those things that happen with working with vulnerable contributors. And that's not easy, but it's the reality.
completely. Azim, did you want to talk about sort of your relationship with Aki as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I met Moss sort of end of last year, and we've exchanged many stories about making films, making our films, and like hearing Moss talk about the effort he went to make his film is just insane. And comparatively, mine was a walk in the park, like um, I reached out to Aki. Well, what the initial plan was, I was gonna sort of reach out to sort of people who I knew were linked to Aki. Other band members, people who like had written articles about him, all that kind of stuff. So I'd scheduled a call with a writer called Rahan Haider, who had written a book where he interviewed Aki. And that was scheduled to happen on like a Wednesday afternoon, and then a few hours before he said he had to cancel, he had to postpone it to the following week. So he said that's fine, let's postpone it. And then I just kind of got this sense of like I'm going to run out of time.
Mm,
I can't keep relying on speaking to other people. And the plan was obviously to reach out to those other people and sort of surround him almost in a less not threat in a not non-threatening way. And then hopefully they'll be like, "Hey, Azeem, he's all right. You should speak to him." Because I had no idea really what Aki was like as a person, but I then found I had the sense that time was running out, and I started Googling Aki's trying to find Aki's contact details, and I found
mm,
his phone number. I found a phone number, and I called it that Wednesday afternoon, and he answered, and it was, I mean, it was very strange initially. I was a bit taken aback that he picked up, and he was watching the news at the time. He hit pause, and he started talking to me, and he was actually very open. He was very generous with his time, and we had a half an hour conversation, and we were talking about obviously I said to him I want to make a documentary about you, and kind of listed some of the reasons, and just told him a bit more about myself, and then we were just like despairing about the world in a way that you often end up doing when you speak to, I guess, like-minded people. um, and I think at the time there was something going on in the world in the UK, like in 2023, March time, whatever it was. After half an hour, we spoke. I put the phone down, and we had made plans for me to go up to Bradford. So I lived in Essex at the time. So Bradford's up in the north. Essex is near London, and so I went up, and he basically drove me around for the whole day. Drove me around Bradford, and he was incredibly generous with his time. And we were just talking and talking and talking, and like so much of that was talking in the car. And I think there's something about being in the car with someone where you're not looking at each other, and we've all had a deep chat in a car, and I think that was sort of like instrumental in a way that we were so open with each other, telling each other about our families, our life stories, essentially regrets, you know opinions about art, music, whatever it might have been. And then by the end of that day, when he dropped me off back at Bradford Station, we had agreed that we were going to work together. And he'd pointed me in the right direction of like where to get a lot of this archive.
mm.
So like for example, the Bill Turnbull BBC Breakfast interview, he told me about that. And then like the next week, I was working at the BBC at the time, and I managed to get a hold of that.
Wow.
Um, and lots of other archive that he was telling me about. Um, so that was sort of that, I guess, like by that point we had agreed to make the film. And it was quite straightforward from that point of view. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, you mentioned also, I mean, both of you have used archival footage like throughout the film at different points, like in sometimes an editing montage and also just to highlight points. I think there's a question there around like how do you navigate something like this, which obviously has so many implications for us today in the modern world, and then tying it back to, well, the time it existed in, both for Iraqi and Satpal situations. I mean, like it's a bit of a tough question, but how do you work to like bring that forward and sort of speak to the ideas that were spoken about 20 years ago and make it relevant in today's world for the audience that we have now, who's obviously so attention starved, or well, you know what I'm talking about, not attention starved, overwhelmed with information.
At least in my case, like as I mentioned before, there was like there were riots, like race riots in 2024, and while we were editing the film, and I remember distinctly having a conversation with Tom Sheriff, who edited and produced the film, and he was saying like, should we put some footage of what's going on right now, like in the car,
Mm,
and we did deliberate on like using, it's like kind of have you seen like Black Klansman, for example, like by Spike Lee? Like at the end, he really brings the message of his film home because he uses like footage from I can't remember the name of the is it Charlestown or something? The riots going on there, the race riots going on there, and we did consider that for a point. I think for us, it was more about showing the imagery from the time period. So we're covering 40 years up until around 2005, 2006, sorry. Um, and there were enough parallels. There was, like I said, there was the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell. There were the various like far right movements and riots and um, you know, moments of defiance, I guess, by the South Asian community in the UK. And we felt that just if we just showed those imagery, that imagery, it would be enough for the audience to kind of make the connection. And so we just kind of put faith in the audience that what we were talking about, even though it was 20 plus years back, they'd be able to make the connection. And I think people have. I think that faith has paid off.
mostly, yeah. Sorry,
Mm.
go for it.
No, no, no. Well, we were in the edit at the same time Azeem was, and that's one of the things. Like you're seeing race riots happen up and down the country, and it was strange to see because Satpal was attacked after the Handsworth riots, which were of a similar nature. And, by the time the film came out, just a couple of weeks ago, Indian restaurants were being firebombed and people were getting attacked on the street. So it really did feel secular. Um, to answer your question, like, how do you bring it around to today? One of the things we really wanted to do was show, like, Satpal was never, he was never, his conviction was never overturned.
Mm,
So he's technically still considered a murderer, which is an injustice, right? Because he did defend himself against a racist attack. However, the campaign was successful in the sense that it did eventually lead to his release.
mm,
And they put so much pressure on the Home Office, on the penal system, the parole board, that they had no choice but to really let him out. There was just an overwhelming amount of support. You had days where they'd organize fax machine protests. So people from around the world, from Tokyo to Canada, would pick a specific day and they'd flood the fax machines at the prison saying free Satpal Ram, why is he in solitary? They did the same at the Home Office, and that was really forward thinking at the time. So one of the things we was like, and I took away from the film or making the film was, even if it's like a small act of protest, once it's collectivized, it does have an impact. So we just kind of wanted people to leave inspired. We're not in a great place today. There's a lot of political prisoners, miscarriage cases. Just doing something small can go a long way. And there's
mm,
many more ways to do that, especially, considering the technology we have now, how connected we all are. Even things like social media, just building a public profile. It definitely does go a long way. Satpal would often say, like, when he'd get letters from people, it just meant the world because it made him visible. When you're locked away, the whole point of prison is to isolate you,
mm,
that makes you vulnerable. You're away from everyone, and they can ultimately do what they want with you. There's not much security to protect the prisoners inside. But those that are supposed to, the prison guards, are the ones inflicting a lot of the violence on the prisoners. So getting support, having a campaign or eyes on the outside that are kind of vouching for you, speaking for you goes a long way. So yeah, that was one of the things, just appreciating how far we've come and a campaign that was successful like Sat Pals and how we can build on that and learn from that and apply that to today. Um, yeah, that was one of our things. And to do that, I suppose doing impact screenings, one of the things we've tried to do is couple it up with current miscarriage cases that have campaigns, so we can see Sat Pal's film, empathize with that, and hopefully be inspired. And then here's some actionable steps to do something for a case today.
Yeah, for sure.
Just if I may just echo what Moss is saying about feeling inspired. I think that Aki's story, even though he does say that he's failed, I disagree with that. I think it's what he's done throughout his career is very inspirational, and I hope that people kind of take some inspiration from it. They may not necessarily get the result that they want, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. And it doesn't mean that there's no change whatsoever. Um, so I think there is a sense of inspiration that Satpal's story or Maki's story I think has.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there's just some things that I thought found just insane. And like he was moved, I think 80 times, over 24 years, which is just unbelievable. And, like to have the level of resilience and conviction to still to want to make the film and speak, even when it's in some ways at personal cost to himself because he's already dealing with so much. But for the greater good, and everybody else convincing him to make it is so powerful. There was one moment, well, a moment in both films as well, but I'm thinking specifically, it was around like 14 minutes in, um, and there was a sort of like this intense shift from sort of like the Asian Dub Foundation doing a gig to, and I cut to like complete silence and Satpal being at home taking medication and sort of like sitting with the physical consequences of his imprisonment. I found that just like the juxtaposition of that extremely beautiful. And I think there's something to be said about both films where also you have like Aki being represented as this sort of like in some ways violent political figure advocating for terrorism, and then you contrast to like seeing him, like looking over the hills in the town, and this is like this moment of like complete peace. I'm really curious to hear about like, well, what decisions you guys were making both in the cut and also when you were filming about showing the juxtaposition of someone who's positioned as a sort of this violent, intense figure to, like the reality of them as a human in this very peaceful way.
Yeah, with that car, I when I did that in the edit, I was so happy. I was,
Beautiful cut, true.
thank you. Yeah, it was. I think it was actually accidental. I think like I was just messing with it basically and trying to like one of the difficulties was bringing Satpal's present into the story because so much of it's retrospective
Mm,
and we've only got 30 minutes to work with. So how are we gonna bring his story in? In the end, we sort of settled for a device that works as a timer, and that's how we sort of weave. Um, and so I would kind of cut it. It was his story from the 90s was here, and then his present was sort of below it. Um, and at some point, I really needed his present to bleed into the film and us just really get immersed in how he's struggling after his experiences. And I thought that was one of the more powerful ways to kind of do it because it just sort of just punches you in the face straight away and you're there. And that's his reality. That's what he's dealing with. Like all of that, what happened to him bleeds into his present, because he's on medication because of the trauma and the
yeah.
violence that he suffered. And these things don't go away. What happened to him all those years ago still affects him. And I think sometimes we don't take that into consideration a lot of the times. Like it's not an isolated thing that's going to affect him for the rest of his life. And like I say, there's many Sat pals out there. So creatively, there's a few things like we don't have time. The pace had to be there. Like
Mm.
we've got to hook you in and just take you on this journey that he was on and the campaigns are on it and take you right to the end. Um, so that cut was kind of consistent with the rest of the film. It just had pace, and that was just a way to bring us into now. And the other thing with that scene as well, where we're talking about 2024 and the race riots, we really wanted to kind of, we couldn't directly show it, but somehow metaphorically kind of show
Mm.
how we're still in not a good way today, like how much the past is still present, really. Um, so as we were in the edit, using that as a device to just sharply cut as like a temporal clash in a way, was a way for us to kind of explore that and do that, really, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. I also think about like the cooking scenes as well with him and Tony. Everyone else was also just like such a beautiful departure from sort of the intensity that was shown. But it
Mhm.
was great. Azim, for the purposes, I have a more specific question. I don't know if you were going to say something on that point, but I'd like to ask you about this just because I know we don't have too much time. Um, it's a slightly tough question, but I think there's something that's definitely you see today as well, where well, it's like the conversation of like separating the art from the artist, right? Um, and I guess for fundamental and like all is war and like the benefits of jihad and all of these things that were seen as this like entirely like provocative pieces of media that in some ways were very important. And then you have like, I don't know, a counter example, you think of like Kanye, today and how it's like provocation for the sake of provocation. I guess it's a tough question, but what makes the sort of provocation that Aki was doing meaningful and useful in contrast?
Jeez, that is a tough
Oh,
question. That is a
sorry.
tough question.
It's so funny.
I don't want to kind of bring other artists into it just because it's very complicated. There's a lot of baggage with with Kanye or with other artists, right? And I've definitely in my time separated art from the artists, um, when I've wanted to, and other times I've not. That is a tough question.
Might not be an answer, I think maybe the film is the answer.
Well, yeah. To be fair, the film is the answer. I suppose the thing about Aki is that he doesn't separate the art and the artist. In Aki's case, is the same thing almost. He is his music almost, and
It's more punk than punk, right?
yeah, yeah. And he lives and dies by what he says, and like that is the ending, right? Like he doesn't have any regrets really about what he's done, which is fine. And like kind of tying back to the other question, like that shot of him sitting alone in the park or sitting alone or standing alone, like overlooking Bradford is sort of, I guess, our visual way of representing not only his loneliness, but like at the end of the day, after all the decisions you've made, you have to be able to sit alone with yourself in silence. And can you do it? And I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who maybe can't do that. Um, Aki can. Um, but there is an inherent loneliness to that. That actually, if you go all the way and if you make that album or that song or write that book or whatever it might be, you might be alone. Um, I don't know if I've answered your second question really at all. And I can, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Feel free to push me a bit more. It's just more. I'm trying to
I
articulate my
think
thoughts.
that's a very comprehensive answer, as much as you can for a question like that, to be fair. I'm curious as well, for both of you. I feel like music, well, and generally the sound design for both films was like quite integral. Obviously, in a very obvious way for Aki's story, because I mean he's a musician himself, and music was so important to him. I think he said it was like one of his religions as well, right? But also in Sapol's story, I think music was one of the ways in which a lot of the activism was done around like promoting his story. I guess I'm curious as to how that played into your approach for both of you in terms of like sound design and how you wanted to incorporate it throughout.
Um, it's hard. How did that like? There's a thread of music throughout all of Satpal's story, right? Like he ends at the gigs. Like he loves music. I think it kind of just shows you how powerful art and music is, and hopefully through watching the films, you feel inspired in a way that films can hopefully be that powerful as well. So yeah, I think it didn't have to work too hard just because naturally that's the story.
Right, right.
Like Helen is a phenomenal jazz musician. She took it to the bands then blew it up, and then you had bigger bands get involved, and Satpal just had a love and appreciation for your music throughout. He even made a bit while he was inside. Um, and then the fact that so many artists got involved, Irvin Welsh, Benjamin Zephaniah, writers, poets, there's so many different people. I just think, yeah, we didn't, it was just kind of natural. I didn't have to
Mm.
labor it too much. In regards to like the sound design of the film and the music and the pace, I think it's just more of a reflection of the tension that the film kind of has and the pace, things like the restaurants and stuff. We didn't want to like amplify it too much, but it is quite strong throughout in the sense like
Mm.
it's just really trying to pull you in and hold you. So yeah, we did use sound design to do that a lot, and our composers were really phenomenal and kind of just understanding is exactly what we wanted um, throughout the story. Like different things. Like it's hopeful towards the end when the bands get involved, we ramp it up. Just stuff like that, really. But yeah, it wasn't too difficult. It already happened. It was there for us to just tell, really.
No, it's true. It did speak for itself. Nazim, you want to talk about maybe the sound design and also like in some ways, well, like the sort of like guerrilla punk style editing as well. I'm so curious about, but
Yeah, I mean the editing is all Tom Sheriff, who is the best editor I know. Like he's just incredible, and like so much of the shape of the film. Like for example, the sequence, the all is war sequence, or the opening sequence with the montages. Like
beautiful.
I would talk extensively to Tom about how he wanted it to feel, and I would go away. And because the way we worked, we had like days where we would in the edit together, but most of it was sort of a remote edit. And because Tom works as an assistant editor at a post-production house, he would just basically edit for like a few hours of course, over the course of the week. And when he had some updates, he would send it to me, and I'd watch it. And so we had met over the weekend and discussed extensively the opening or the All is War sequence, and then he would just send it to me, and there was very little change on that front. Like we'd edited, we made small changes to the archive footage, but the actual pace and stuff was determined a lot by Tom, who's incredible. Um, and in terms of like sound design, like the film was constantly oscillating between um, quiet and loud, you know.
Mm,
And when you listen to Fundamentals music, if you're familiar, like the Fundamentals music is like a slap in the face sometimes. Like it's so kind of overt. And then, but we you can't sustain that for a whole film, especially for not for 25 minutes.
mm.
And so we had to kind of like quieten down a little bit and get closer to Aki and kind of get into his headspace um, and then come back and before you know it, it's the punk days and then it quite quietens down again and you're thinking about like Salman Rushdie and then it gets loud again with the fundamental and so it's kind of always about that. I mean even the final track which I was sort of before we had even shot anything I knew that was going to be the ending of the film, at least I was going to use that track as the ending of the film. That is called "There Shall Be Love," and I think there is a sense of optimism, but there's also melancholy to that track that is really important. And we didn't have a huge amount of money. We like Tom was one who also recorded the sound on when we were out and about. It was literally just like one lapel mic, a camera on top of the camera, sorry, a microphone on top of the camera, and that was it. But Tom and I worked really hard on the sound design. Then we handed it over to a guy called Michael Griggs, who really just like enhanced everything. Every idea that we had, he just made it better, and elevated everything.
Awesome. I think it speaks to just the importance of collaboration for things like these. Like you cannot do everything yourself, and you should not, maybe. I could honestly keep going. I have so many more questions, but I'm being told that I should start to move towards some audience Q&A. I have a new interesting question here that I'm interested to see how both of you will answer, but it is essentially, do you think Aki's music that scared white people created further hysteria and a more hostile place in society for racially discriminated folks like Satparam? Loaded question.
Um, I don't think the timelines quite work out that way because I
Mm.
think Satpal was in prison around the same time. When did Satpal get arrested? When?
Um, 87,
Okay, yeah.
87, yeah, I believe.
So that was sort of around the time that Aki was just getting into music. So I don't think the timelines quite work out. And I think obviously, as we know with Asian Top Foundation, who want a dissimilar band to Fundamental, I think what their incredible body of work was sort of enhancing the campaign and furthering the campaign for Stat Power. Um, I suppose like you don't really know the impact of something until it comes out. So it's all well and good saying like often, artists make stuff to try and have an impact. And I've worked on stuff, as it on jobs and stuff where the directors have said, I want this to change stuff or I want this to wake people up, and it comes out and like no one cares. And it's not necessarily because of the quality of the film or anything like that. It's just because of how people consume like media nowadays,
Mm.
or has how they've always consumed things. So I think the tricky thing is that you don't know how people are going to perceive something until it comes out. And up until that point, up until that All Is War album, like Fundamentals were actually like quite a big band, for their size and for like the scene that they're in, that they were quite like people liked what they had to say and people engaged with what they had to say. And what they had to say prior to this wasn't exactly miles away from what All Is War is about in terms of subject matter, but it kind of came out at a time when people were very sensitive. I also think that the press knew that
Mm.
and kind of used that to the advantage that ultimately that if you listen to All Is War and you listen to those tracks, I don't think it's actually as controversial as maybe that they were perceived to be.
Sure.
Hmm. I don't. Is a good question,
That's a good
but
point.
I don't know. Like, I think you're opposite. As you kind of read the question out, I thought of Sat Pao, and is he like just think of the incident. Like, is him sat there taking the racial abuse or him defending himself? Is that making it worse? Because yeah, in a way, you can argue it did make it worse because
Mm.
then they got into a fight and someone died. But the opposite is you just sit there and take it. And the whole thing about Sat Pao was no. You stand up for yourself, you say something. And I would relate the same thing to kind of Aki, it is provocative. That's the point, Or is it making your situation worse? I wouldn't like it, even if it is, because we can't really measure it, but that's not the fault of Aki in a way,
Yeah.
you know. But it's an interesting question. But I think I kind of liked it. It's like you're not afraid to say something, and that people see that and feel dignified in a way, or feel a level of you feel so disempowered. Like if we're looking at like the post 9/11 world, you feel so disenfranchised and alienated. You're bastardizing the media, and then you have someone that's very as a punk and says something. There was a quote that was going around that a lot of people started to become a lot more religious in that time. And people would say, wearing a hijab or a niqab is one of the more punk things to do now, because you're now in a society that's policing you and scrutinizing you for your religious expression. So doubling down was a political motif. And in that sense, did that make it worse? Maybe, but I don't think Aki's the person to blame if that's the case. If that makes sense.
100%. I mean, you could argue even that, like, to some level, you need some sort of provocation for it to be valuable resistance. You can't just sit there and expect things to fix in and of themselves, right? And again,
No.
like, yeah, like stuff like wearing a hijab is punk. I mean, there's like shows like We Are Lady Parts, for example, is all about sort of that dynamic in some like of a comedy sense, but same ideas. Again, another question from the audience that I think is quite interesting. The question is, with stories like both of theirs, where the context is so rich and it feels like you could spend 90 minutes painting the scenery, how do you limit yourself to stay true to the story that you told?
Um, yeah, really good question. Um, I think we've just got to strip it back. Like again, like the limitations that we had in a way made us we had to just be really brutal in the edit. there was a lot of things that we wanted to talk about and spend more time on, but how much of it really progresses the story. Like, I suppose, when he released those the call logs where the prison officers were very visibly being racist. There's a bit more to that story, but at the same time, it's like we don't have the time right now to kind of splinter off and explore that. So we're able to tease a bit of it, which helps progress the story of Satpal while he's inside and help us move to the next chapter in his story, really. So it's just having to be really brutal, I
Mm,
think, and just being really strict to telling as much of the story and the main bits as possible, because I think in both films there's a lot more to explore, but you just don't have the time or the resources always, so it's just being strict to really what you're trying to say. And they're both shorts, and I think they both tackle a lot being shorts. Usually your advice is to just be very microscopic on one thing, but neither of us really did that. Um, you know, so it's just being really strict with yourself and seeing what really benefits the story, I think.
mhm,
Yeah, I just echo what Moss has said that you have to kind of kill your darlings. Essentially, you have to and make every second count. And sometimes you're literally, I mean, I'm sure Moss did the same thing. Like you're literally just editing frames just to try and trim things down, but get the essential details, get the information across to the audience without feeling like it's too long or it's you're going on on unnecessary details. I think for us it was also it helped the limitations of like not having enough time to sort of tell the story maybe in the way that we would have wanted to and like have lots of other people's voices meant that we kind of leaned in. We went the opposite way. We leaned into the subjectivity of Aki. And so that's why really like he's the only voice in the film. And it was about spending 25 minutes with Aki and really getting to know him and seeing the world through his eyes. And I think that actually gave us I think it made the film better as a short. It made the film better because it meant that there's a point of view that maybe we would have lost if or it would have gotten filtered. It'd been filtered out, I suppose, maybe if we had lots of other voices in there. So I think using those limitations to your advantage.
mhm. There's another really question about sort of inspiration. I'm gonna edit it just slightly to ask you both how much influence, I mean, telling the story and sort of going through the whole process of filming it and making it did that impact you personally? Like, do you have takeaways? And I quote unquote, are you changed? You
Uh,
know?
I mean, it kind of takes over your life in a way. Um, like I said, I started properly working on it in tw early 2023. And I didn't finish it until the end of middle of 2025. I kind of because a lot of my job right now is like just trying to get the film out there. So thank you guys by the way for coming and seeing the film. But like it's still part of my life. It's still like it's been over 3 years of working on it essentially. Um, and so I suppose when you spend that much time on anything, you start to put bits of yourself into it. And there were certainly points where I thought it was going to it was going to ruin my life. Like it's like what have I done? I should have just no one was asking for this film, um, and so you have to kind of really make sure that like you're certain on why you want to tell the story, and that I suppose that's what I've learned from it. I suppose it's just like you need to have a good reason for telling it.
Mm.
I heard Azeem started praying 5 times a day after making the film.
That true, Azeem? No, 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 I'm not
No comment.
gonna.
I'm joking, I'm joking. Um, I think I came out. It was so difficult. I'll be honest with you, like I didn't feel anything towards the film once it was done. It was
Mm,
just so exhaustive. Like I've only like spoke to you about how it was complicated working with Sat Pal, but it wasn't just Sat Pal. There were many other characters either in or out of the film that were very hard and challenging to work with. And Sat Pal's story really, I think, had everything for a feature, and one of the things was we can do that because of Satpal's condition.
Mm,
And one of the other, he was on life license, which means he can be recalled to prison at any time. So there's a lot of paranoia that comes with that. And during the process, one of Satpal's friends were recalled back to prison, which kind of triggered a lot of the paranoia. So we had to then stop. So there was just a lot in the way, and in the end, I just didn't feel anything towards it anymore. I was so exhausted, like it's emotionally exhausting. Campaigners that spent so long, they haven't opened this up in, 20, 30 years. I'd be on the phone, and in a way you turn into people's counselors. Like I didn't know how much trauma they held. This person and this person might have fallen out over something, and to chuck so much of your life at a campaign and all the internal politics. You try so hard to get a decision, and then it doesn't go the way you want, and he's still in prison. It's really challenging. It was really challenging, and I think in many ways I'm still processing that side of things. There was so many times that we just didn't think it was going to work, but you
mm,
push through. So like it was nice. It was rewarding when Satpal saw it, and then when all the campaigners saw it in Birmingham, and they had a positive reaction, they had an emotional reaction. Then I started to feel like, okay, you know what? I think
mm.
we did it. But yeah, being absolutely honest, no, I did it. I think it just, yeah, I was just gutted. I was just gutted. Like, but now I've got a better relationship with it as time's going on. But you obsess over these things. Like that film was, literally like Azeem saying, it was just my life all those years. So
It's insane. It's
yeah.
insane. I've spoken to so many filmmakers who've had similar sort of reflections in that they're glad to have made it, and they think that like again it's quote unquote important and out there, but like personally so taxing, and in some ways like the more important or like the more like resistancy the film is, in some ways the more difficult it becomes, because then there's like
Mm,
some level of like moral compass that you have to navigate as well, and like are you meant to be representing that story or whatever, it's crazy
mm.
how common this theme is. But like that said, I mean, I can say it for myself. I'm sure I'm speaking for the other audience too when I say this, but like we're glad that you went through that effort, like and spent the time, both of you, to tell the story, um, and to be here to talk about it as well. I think we are at time. But again, I just wanted to say thank you both so much. Thank you to the Chelsea Tasmanian team, and everybody in Karachi as well who's here, who came to watch it. Yeah, it's been really great, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again on Sunday. Yeah, if anyone has any final thoughts, questions, reflections, please fire away. But
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what you're saying. Thanks to the whole team, especially Samir, who I've kind of been in contact with for about 6 months trying to get this together, and he's been very patient with us. So thank you, Samir, and thank you, Zen, for hosting this, and Moss for your great film as well. So thank you.
No, just thank you again. Thank you for everyone that came to see it. Thank you, Samir, for your patience. I've not been easy with you.
yeah, Samir is telling me to tell you that he sends his love.
Oh, thank God. Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Zane, thanks for an amazing Q&A, and Saif, lovely to meet you. And yeah, again, just thanks for having us and putting this on. And yeah, hopefully, you know, you took something away from it.
Yeah.
Uh, Very
Also,
great.
we're on Letterboxd. I don't know if you
Oh
if you
yeah, everybody give that five
post
star
post the
review.
reviews, all the kind of
Oh, and thank you, Azeem, actually, for sorting this out, because Azeem put a lot of work in for this, and he's just done an amazing job, supporting us, and just really glad to finally pair our films together.
Yeah.
One final, like, something to mention, we didn't. Aki supported Satpal's campaign as well.
No
He's got a
way.
cardboard cutout of Satpal in his house. I didn't even know until the film came out.
That's crazy.
So, it's a pairing that was always supposed to happen. So, thank you, Azeem, as well, for seeing that and getting us here.